Chapter 3. Give us a moment, please, the captain said to the stable boy. He nudged his filly forward and stared down at Jakin. What about my son? The man that attacked your son, he's killed nomadic tribes, Jakin said. Entire tribes, without an apparent motive. He hunts them. Children and mothers lay dead next to each other. The men, though, it's too much to say, except that they were killed with violent methods. Plural. Our seer knew when and where this man was going to be and arranged a trade route to be conducted that would intercept him. Kosai stood the best chance of survival, and if he failed, the consequences would be, minimal. What do you mean Kosai stood the best chance for survival? Your decision may have killed him. How is that minimal? The option of assigning you to this task was brought forward, Jakin said softly, holding up his hands defensively, but it was decided to keep you here. Your loss would be too much for the city to bear. The information we gained from Kosai's encounter, though, is vital to our survival, and the survival of our trade routes. The seer told us that if Kosai survived, it would lead to the eventual downfall of this enemy. What does the council know of this? Just as much as I've told you now. The captain shook his head and turned away to make his way back to the barracks. Jakin ran up and stopped a safe distance in front of the horse. Captain, please. Kosai's survival means that there's a first-hand account of this figure. Did he discuss what happened to him in the storm? Briefly. The captain paused and looked at Jakin, studying him from head to toe. Good, Jakin said and smiled. If you could come with me, I will take you to meet our instructors. They'll be able to give you more information. You can leave your horse here. The captain dismounted the horse and turned her back to the stables. The boy took the reins. Give her another brushing and you'll get a piece of silver, the captain said. The stable boy smiled. How long is this walk? Across the courtyard into that domed building. Jakin pointed to the structure. The building had an unobtrusive look. The unpainted exterior and lack of decorations or banners allowed the building to seemingly fade away into the background. 5 stairs led up from the ground level into the walkway that was under the overhang of the dome. Jakin and the captain walked side by side through the pavilion and stopped at the fountain. Both scooped their hands into the pool to take a drink before continuing to the building. The captain was looking up as he approached the stairs. Large pylons circumvented the perimeter and supported the overhanging roof. The cement used in the construction was as brown as the sand strewn about the city. Walls, entrances, and other areas where banners and flags would have hanged were bare. At the top of the stairs was a single, plain wooden door, no more ornate than the rest of the building. 2 conduits stood in front of the steps. Jakin stretched his arm in front of the captain to stop him. Wait here, he said cautiously as he approached one of the conduits. Jakin leaned forward and whispered something into the conduit's ear. The conduit nodded and gestured for him and the captain to enter. What was that about? The captain asked softly as they walked up the stairs. We need a deterrent, much like how the Capitol building now has a deterrent. So much secrecy. What do you have to hide? You'll see, Jakin said. Jakin opened the wooden door and motioned for... Jakin opened the door for the captain to enter. The first corridor beyond the entry was a long hallway perpendicular to the door that curved off to both sides, similar to what the city's outer road looked like. Wall-mounted torches gave off a gentle glow. The captain examined one that hung next to the door. Instead of flickering flames, the light source was a suspended orb. He frowned and looked at the cement floors and walls, absent of any painting or decor. The hall to the right leads to our sleeping quarters, Jakin said. as well as the library, garden, teachers' offices, classrooms, and conference rooms. You'll see those areas later. Your presence is requested in our arena. Jakin and the captain turned left. They continued until the entryway was no longer visible behind them. The hallway changed into a long, shallow stair that descended sharply to the right. The door at the landing of the bottom of the stairs led into a tunnel with an arched roof. Their steps echoed as they walked. At the end of the tunnel was a large open arena with a domed ceiling. The arena had 2 levels. The lower section was a dirt floor with a high wall that surrounded it. It was a large enough arena to practice equine drills, though getting a horse into the building would be impossible. The upper section had rows of chairs. Each chair had a rounded back carved from a dark brown wood, which alternated between 2 symbols, a hammer and anvil, and a fist holding 2 strands of wheat. The seats had a flat salmon-colored cushion. A stout elderly man stood in the center of the arena. He wore a heavy brown robe that wrinkled and folded over his joints. A triple coiled rope wrapped around his waist and tied in front of him in a thick square knot. The captain looked at the talisman that was draped on the seer's neck, held by 3 interwoven pieces of twine. It was a polished white bone that looked like an oversized metacarpal. They moved towards the smaller set of stairs that led down into the arena. "This is our arena where we train our students," Jakin said. "You'll be meeting our seer here. Ah, yes, there he is." The captain eyed the seats as they walked by and brushed his fingers along them. "The chairs were a gift from the capital," Jakin said. "For a dedicated and continued commitment to serve," I believe were the exact words of the council. The captain and Jakin stepped into the arena. The seer favored his left leg as he hobbled towards the captain, extending a hand in greeting. His eyebrows, recently trimmed, looked more like gray lines rather than bushy brow of an aged man. Dark age spots and freckles covered his tanned skin and decorated his bald head. "And the service we can provide as of late lacks utility, doesn't it, Jakin?" the seer said, raising an eyebrow. "Captain, it's good to see you." The captain shook the seer's hand. "I am aware that you're here to relay what Kosai saw in the desert," the seer said, "specifically the enemy that attacked him." "As well as to relay my frustration," the captain said firmly. "Kosai came to me, near death. For what? What makes an encounter with this figure worth the life of my son? Your conduits have trained to heal lesser wounds and failed. Tell me, why him?" "Wait, how do you know that he was attacked?" The captain clenched his hands into tight fists. The trio stood in silence for a moment. "Jakin," the seer said softly, "please inform the others that I'm going to be late. You are dismissed." The seer gave a small, dismissive wave of his hand. Jakin bowed and exited through a plain brown door with a brass handle at the back of the arena. When the door closed, the seer shook his head. "I apologize for not being able to tell you sooner, Captain, but the walls are growing ears as of late. Trust in this school is as thin as parchment." He paused and wiped the back of his neck with his hand. The captain scowled mildly, keeping his eyes on the seer. "The orders for the routes and the number of guards to escort the caravan all come from me. Remember that attacks used to be far and few between. In the past, I used to be able to plan an entire month and not foresee an attack. Now, an ambush happens every journey, no matter how I see it." The captain grunted. "Answer me quickly. How do you know of Kosai's attack?" The seer sighed and let out a slow, controlled breath. "Recently, a colleague of mine asked me to see further into the future regarding these routes. In my vision, I saw the attack from the hooded figure, the same man that injured your son. And you sent him anyway? I came here for answers. Why? The captain barked. There isn't a simple answer. The context is important in this case. Someone close to me is leaking our trade route orders to a group that may want the government and your guard to disappear. I'm not sure. That is why I asked Jakin to leave. Help me understand. The captain paused and rubbed his forehead and looked down at the ground. How does this all pull together? Tell me Kosai's injuries were worth something. First, let me explain one detail. Your son will survive his wounds, and I never intended that he would be in such a critical condition. Pertaining to the worth of the experience, we will evaluate that in our next meeting. The seer wiped a thin layer of sweat from his forehead. Before that, there are a few details you should be aware of. First, the figure that Kosai encountered, his name is Wilhelm. He is an old enemy who killed dozens of our teachers more violently than any of us could imagine. Secondly, one of my colleagues asked me to foresee Wilhelm's demise. I saw your son kill him. The method was peculiar. First, the battle took place in the desert. As they fought, the scenery around them changed to the city, with the last scene being in a cave. Before Kosai gave the final stroke, an impenetrable shadow covered my viewing. When my vision returned, Kosai stood over Wilhelm. Rarely do I see events with such ambiguity. I assigned your son to the caravan, hoping. The captain looked down at the dirt and sighed. Why is Wilhelm a threat? Besides murder, what else do you have against him? That answer will be provided in the next meeting, the seer said. But that's not what I wanted to discuss. I need Kosai to find the one leaking the information about the trade routes. This school will train him in our ways, and in exchange, I will pay Kosai double his average monthly earnings. The captain remained silent. We will be feeding him and providing lodging. I will personally see to his safety. The captain didn't respond. I can't afford more than double without it looking suspicious, and I have the perfect cover that will benefit both of our school's needs, as well as my own. You would have access to him if requested at any time, as well as our facilities. You want me to send my son into the hands of the man that sent him to die in the desert. The seer gave out a slight hum and shook his head. He grabbed his left knee and rubbed it gently. The captain scowled at him, folding his arms across his chest. When a seer looks into the future, a portion of that seer's life is taken. I have seen many caravans, wars, ambushes, storms, and much else besides. How old are you? 50? 60? I am 35, the seer said softly, and I look old enough to be your father. He smiled and stared back at the captain. I cannot stand to see people dying from starvation in the streets while I'm dying as I try to save them. I pray to the Faye that we find the betrayer before it's too late. I have no motive. I'm a young man at heart, and at the same time, very old. A seer's life, it's so short. A few weeks ago, during the evening, as I was retiring to my room for the night, I noticed a woman, a teacher from our own school named Mierto, heading out. She was dressed rather drably, almost as if to blend in with the commoners. I didn't think anything of it until the next week when she left for a second time. I noted it in my journal and noticed that it was happening on the same nights that I planned the caravan routes. It wasn't long after that that the attacks from the nomadic tribes escalated. I can't imagine a woman such as her going and talking directly with the nomads. She must have a connection to the tribe somehow. Why would she do such a thing? Could be anything, could be nothing. I don't know. This is where Kosai comes in. I'm going to assign Mierto to train him personally. She will believe that she is training him to kill Wilhelm, and he will learn if she is the one leaking the information, and if she is, why. If it isn't her, he may be able to find out who is. What do you think, Captain? Will you lend him to me? The seer's arms were outstretched. The oily sheen of sweat on his forehead reflected light from the ensconced torches on the wall. The money is not what entices me. It is the oath that I took to protect the nation, this city, and its people. The protection of the caravan means the sustainability of its citizens. Kosai will agree to it. The seer sighed in relief. I will talk to him about this more when he recovers. If he recovers. He will, the seer said. The captain sighed. I'll also do some investigative work on my side and see what I can find for us. Do you have any idea who she might be leaking information to? The seer asked. The Three Brothers Syndicate, wealthy as they are, pays those who remain loyal to them. Their wagons rarely suffer harm at the hand of storms or nomadic tribes. It isn't a far stretch to suspect that she is telling him the route information. The syndicate could buy off nomads to attack the government caravans even. I will arrange a summons for you to request a few warrants, the seer said. But the council, I'm sure you've seen firsthand, favors the Three Brothers. It may be difficult to acquire the necessary votes. The captain nodded in agreement. Can't you see into her future and see if she's the one betraying the city? The captain asked. The seer chuckled softly. I wish it were that simple. The strain from seeing a specific person for an extended period of time is great, and I don't have the strength or youth to withstand it as I once did. But planned events, such as patrols, or a death, a birth, what a spouse might look like, or occurrences without a time restraint require less effort. I can see a what much easier than I can see a when. Does that make any sense? The seer leaned forward, biting his bottom lip. It does. The captain closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead with his calloused fingers. Can you tell me if Mierto will leak the caravan routes to someone other than those who assist in planning them? He asked slowly. Awkwardly asked, but yes, I can. I've been waiting a long time to see if anyone would ask me that question, the seer said. Why didn't you see it to begin with? I can only see when another asks me to see. It is one of the rules for my talent. I can't see something on my own. The Faye restrains me from such things. The seer smiled and closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were covered in a slight gray film. It is early in the morning, before the sun rises. The moon is a waning crescent. Mierto stands outside of a building. It is a square cement house with one window. The door opens. The light from inside illuminates a sign above the door. The name is hidden, but there is an emblem of two golden snakes twirling upward around each other. She and a man, I'm assuming it's a man, sit at a table. Yes, he has the figure of a male. He is of average height, but his face is shrouded by a tan cloth. A map is placed on the table. She is pointing on the parchment where the caravans will travel. The man nods and gestures to the door. As the seer finished speaking, the gray film faded from his eyes. His appearance changed mildly. More age spots slowly appeared on his speckled face and neck. The veins in his hands and arms were moderately more prominent, complemented with a few wrinkles that creased the corners of his eyes. You see why seers don't live too long, he said, breathing heavily. The captain nodded. You've done a great service to this city and its people. Far greater than I think you have realized, Captain. Let's join the others. They're earnest to hear your report. They returned to the main entrance of the school and continued down the curved hallway. It led to a second wing, but the seer took the captain through the first door on the left. Wood planks lined the cement walls and ceilings. A long rectangular table drew the focus to the center of the room that had an iron chandelier hanging above its middle. Orbs of yellow light hovered where candles should have been in the fixture. The man who sat at the head of the table stood. He was a head taller than the captain, but as broad in the shoulders. He wore a white shirt with lace sleeves. A purple stripe ran down each side of his uniform. Any muscular definition hid beneath his loose clothing. A wooden staff laden with marks and intricate burns rested against his seat. Draped over the back of his chair was a tan cloak with white cords sewn in at the trim and hem. When he stood, the room quieted, and everyone turned their attention towards him. Captain, thank you for coming here today. My name is Deus, and I am the principal and head teacher of the School of the Fae. Before this meeting begins, I think it would be appropriate for each of us to introduce ourselves. Why don't we start with Theo? Deus gestured to a man that sat at his left. Theo, a man of average height but thin in the face and hands, stood and cleared his throat. Briefly, he explained that his official title was assistant to the head teacher, but he was more commonly referred to as the assistant. He was from Antiparil. The captain studied him, searching for a characteristic that would make him stand out in a crowd. His nose protruded like a parrot's beak, and he spoke with a calm, slow, airy voice. The next teacher was Victor from Lanaus. His beady blue eyes, small nose, and small ears, combined with his closely shaved hair, made his face look too large. He spoke succinctly, but those words carried a tone that hinted at experience and command. Zidane was from the country of Kate. Her hair was as black as a polished obsidian stone. It complemented her natural tan complexion. Her high cheekbones and pointed chin were common traits of one from the southern nation across the sea. Isaac was from Lanaus. He was a round and overly plump individual. The sight of him and fat-sounding voice made the captain's stomach turn. Isaac said that the doctors told him his morbid obesity was a glandular issue. Alkeen, the next teacher, was from Port Rasmu and was the opposite of Isaac. He was short, thin, and frail-looking. Besides his graying hair, wrinkles, and bald spot, he appeared no larger than the stable boy at the barracks. Alkeen stuttered about his passion for books and hurriedly sat down. The seer was next, but instead gestured past the captain to Cherelle. She was from Antiparil and came from a family of merchants that existed before the three brothers. She was as tall as the captain and had the sleeves of her uniform cut at the shoulder. She flexed and tensed her arms as she mentioned the syndicate. Ferris was from Noiknaer, and when he stood, a tendril of fire peeled off from his neck, but no one spoke. He told of his family and how they had starved to death, even with the assistance from the government caravans. "I'm telling you this, Captain, not for your pity, but for your trust," he said before he sat down, and the next teacher stood. "I am Emily," she said. She looked at Ferris tenderly. "Ferris is a man full of passion and dreams of a day without hunger. I think you can appreciate that, Captain." The captain nodded. "I am also from Noiknaer. My father was a teacher here in the school. Wilhelm murdered my parents." She was a smaller woman with brown curly hair that flowed down to her shoulders. When she sat down, she whispered something in Ferris's ear, but the captain couldn't hear what she said. Ferris nodded, and the next teacher stood. Jacqueline was also from Port Rasmu. She was a tall and slender woman with long blonde hair and green eyes. She, like Alkeen, didn't say much, but watched the captain with a studious eye. The captain smiled back at her. The next teacher stood slowly, and with great deal of effort. Yeah. The next teacher was an older man with scraggly gray hair that puffed around his head and beard to look like a tangled ball of white thread. He stood slowly and with a great deal of effort. The final teacher, who sat at his right, helped him stand up. He introduced himself as Wizen. The last teacher introduced herself as Mirto and sat down. She wore a brown robe over a plain green dress. Her braided red hair stopped short of the small of her back. Deus looked at her, shrugged, and stood. On behalf of the school and the teachers that are present, I want to thank you for the sacrifice in sending your best student into uncertain danger. Jakin has informed us that you have a report on his encounter, and with humility, we ask that you give it. When Deus finished speaking, he gestured to the captain, and the captain stood. Kosai is stable for now, the captain said, supporting himself on the table, his knuckles digging into the wood. It will take an extreme amount of time for him to recover from his wounds. There is severe muscle damage to his left arm from a lindworm bite. It may take up to 2 years before he is fully recovered. The captain stopped himself before continuing. His encounter with Wilhelm was odd. He relayed to them Kosai's story in every detail he could remember. He also mentioned the vial filled with the black substance that Wilhelm carried. When he finished speaking, he sat down and Mirto stood. How did Wilhelm gain the ability to both be a specter and material being? Captain, concerning the black vial that was in Wilhelm's hand, did Kosai relate any specifics about it? She sat down, and the captain stood. Kosai told me that there was a stream of purple lightning from the black vial when one of his strikes connected. I would argue that this vial grants him a type of invulnerability, Deus said, slowly standing. Captain, we must be honest with you. The first ambushes were retaliatory. Wilhelm slaughtered nomadic tribes, and in turn, the other tribal leaders concluded that he was a hired mercenary from Noiknaer. In response, they attacked our caravans. The violence and threats continued, but any mention of our enemy vanished from reports. He disappeared, Wilhelm that is, hiding somewhere in the desert, until he fought Kosai. With your son's survival comes a glimmer of a chance of peace. He gestured towards the seer with an open hand. Have you reached an agreement? Deus and the captain sat. The seer stood slowly, pressing his body up with his hands on the table. Jakin stood also, gently holding the seer's arms to assist him. Yes, the captain agreed to lend him to us. We are aware that no weapon or power exists to kill or harm our enemy. He's ethereal and corporeal in his interactions. I saw Kosai defeat him, and when Wilhelm attacks again, our newest pupil will be ready with the skills that we have to teach. It is paramount that his instruction begins as soon as he is healthy. The seer sat down and Mirto shot up, slamming her palms on the table. And who will teach him? He does not show promise, else we would have taken him in. The awakening will kill him if he's too eager. She stayed standing and gestured to the seer for him to speak. You will teach him, the seer said. Mirto flushed in frustration and sat down hurriedly. You survived a forced awakening, and under your tutelage, so will Kosai. The seer turned to the captain. The awakening ceremony is a necessary process, a ritual, if you will, each student undertakes before becoming a conduit. The process is easy for attuned students, potentially deadly for any who are not. Rest assured, I saw Kosai kill Wilhelm. He will survive. He spoke reassuringly, tapping the captain's arm. Deus stood next. Captain, I thank you for lending us Kosai. He should report to us as soon as he is recovered. I understand your opinion on our healings, but given the circumstances, would you prefer to have a conduit attend to him? The captain growled and shook his head. The seer said he will recover. That is sufficient for me. The youth, both boys and girls, and even some of my graduates, if they do not experience the consequences of pain, their confidence in being healed will get them killed in battle. Deus nodded and smiled at the captain. With that, I adjourn this meeting. Be on guard and be watchful. The teachers stood and made their way to the door. Excuse me, the seer said, and then cleared his throat. It would be a great disservice if we were to leave without telling the captain the history of Wilhelm and why we need his student. You didn't tell him? Deus asked. I mentioned that it would be brought up in this meeting, the seer replied, wiping sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his robe. The head teacher shook his head. Captain, why did you agree to it? Deus asked. If what the seer saw is true, the captain replied, looking again at the frail man, and I am under the assumption that he is, then I have nothing to fear, and neither does my son. But why now? If Wilhelm is such a threat, why did you wait until he is near graduation to ask me for his instruction here? Wilhelm disappeared into the desert, and someone had to ask about Wilhelm's demise. That nearly killed my son. For what? No one has yet to answer that. It is the events surrounding the mass murders that worry us, Deus said calmly. He looked at the seer, shook his head again, and sighed. Some time ago, a head teacher named Zenith sojourned in the desert, traveling north, past Varlette, to meditate and cleanse his mind. He returned with a massive knowledge which greatly advanced our perception of the world and its energies. Not long after his return, he brought his illegitimate son to this school. He hid him in a room made of stone and planned to burn him on an altar. In his madness, he convinced a few of the teachers and students to assist him. Those who kept their sanity caught word of what was happening and came to the child's aid. When they found Wilhelm, who was the child at the time, he stood next to the stone altar. His bonds were cut, and a fire was engulfing him. His hair and clothes burned, but nothing else. His father, as well as those others who tried to kill him, lay dead in front of him. Those of us who weren't in league with Zenith took the boy as our own. He grew through the ranks and became an assistant to the head teacher. One by one, he secretly killed many of our order. By a strange method, he managed to drain their bodies of their blood. When we found him as the murderer, the head teacher attempted to end his life. They failed. Wilhelm was impervious to their attacks, standing with his arms outstretched. Only when the teachers exhausted their energies did Wilhelm leave with a smile. We don't know how your son is going to defeat Wilhelm. We just know that he will. The seer tapped his fist on the table. Captain, we are asking much from your student. If there was another way, I would have it. Kosai is our hope against Wilhelm. I ask again, will you lend him to us? The captain glared at the seer and at the other teachers. None met his gaze. Do any of you know why this Wilhelm chose now, of all places, to strike, and why he singled out my son? His question was answered with silence. You said Wilhelm is impervious to any attack. You want to teach my son skills that will cause him harm to acquire, that in the end may not help him? Deus stood. Yes, but it is all that we know how to do. Your son, Kosai, will be led and guided, and perhaps he may discover why this task falls to him. I surmise that myself, thank you. The captain ran his hands through his hair and sighed. Still, you have not given me any assurance that my son will be safe here. Your son isn't safe anywhere, Miartos said fiercely. Yes, we are blind as to why Wilhelm attacked when he did. We have even less of an idea as to why he hasn't sought out your son sooner, or any of us for that matter. He knows he can do anything, and that perhaps we can do nothing. Your speech does little to help the situation, the seer said. Captain, Miartos started in a calm tone, why isn't Kosai dead? The captain smiled, genuinely. I didn't see it before. That is a relief. The seer looked between the two and looked to Deus. Deus shrugged and shook his head. Wilhelm can go anywhere, the captain continued, and no one can touch him. The reason he didn't kill Kosai in the desert, and why Kosai isn't dead now, is that Wilhelm fears him. Miartos smiled and nodded approvingly. I have faith that you, He looked at Mierdo and paused. We'll aid him in his journey. An unstoppable enemy, however calm and distant, is a great threat to Tessír. Agreed, Deus said, clapping his hands together. With that, we finish this meeting. Thank you, Captain, for your attendance. The teachers and Jachin left the table and exited the room. The seer and the captain remained seated. I cannot thank you enough for allowing your son to come study with us, the seer said, looking down at the table. I hope that you and he will make quick work of this investigation. There's a reason why his nickname is the Wolf of the Capitol Barracks, the captain said with a grin. The seer smiled back. Kosai's new uniform will arrive at your office later this evening. I will also enclose a council summons to request of a warrant for the three brothers. There was a knock at the door. Enter, the seer said. Jachin stepped in. Oh, Jachin, what are your thoughts on this meeting? There's an anxious feeling among the teachers. Should I escort the captain out? No, I will do that, the seer said as he turned towards the captain. You and your guards are making a sacrifice for us. There was a soft, determined look in the seer's eyes. His brow bent down, concentrating, and his hands were still. You're welcome, the captain said softly. Jachin, please see if Deus has any errands that he needs done with the council. I have nothing else for you today. Jachin bowed his head and left. The seer watched the door long after it closed and held up a finger to his mouth, gesturing for the captain to be silent. He makes me nervous, the seer whispered. Come, I'll show you out. The pair walked in silence from the school to the pavilion. The two guards almost stood at attention as the captain passed by. Dust filled the road from foot traffic and carts moving back and forth full of goods. The sounds of trading and bartering from the market washed over the pavilion. A breeze swirled through the city, carrying smells of fruit, harsh spices, salt, meat, sweat, and excrement, creating a lingering aroma like a damp, moldy rag. The water from the fountain gurgled and splashed in an unending fit of violent hiccups. It concerns you that Jachin may have heard too much, the captain said. The seer nodded. It is as I said before. The trust in our school is as thin as parchment. I fear that my words may have placed you and your son in more danger than was already present. Forgive me. The captain furrowed his brow and looked down at the seer. He will suit you well. If he can survive the desert and being mauled by lindworms, he will survive whatever danger your school may put him in. The seer thanked him again and said his goodbyes, leaving the captain in the pavilion. The populace moved out of the captain's path as he traveled down the center of the streets. He kept his stern, stoic look, but his mind was anxiously concerned on his son's recovery. When he reached the barracks, he went straight into his office and sat in his high-backed chair behind his desk. The chair was like the style that the council had, though not as tall. The desk was made from a heavy, deep red wood. Reliefed carved roses and lilies decorated the trimmings of the desk. A white and red floor rug with the emblem of Tessír in black was laid in front of the desk, extending the length of the office to the door. To the left of the doorway was a series of bookshelves filled with books and trophies from the combat competitions of his youth. Next to the keepsakes were jaws of lindworms that he killed in the desert. A steel coat rack was on the other side of the doorway. It was as tall as the door, and at the top sprouted into 4 different hooks. All paid with blood, the captain whispered as he ran his hand along the desk, feeling the smooth resin polish. A knocking at the door roused him from his reminiscing. Come in, the captain said. One of his graduates entered, carrying a wooden box. Sir, these all came for you, 2 letters and a package. Yes, bring me the letters and set the crate next to the coat rack. You're dismissed. The guard did as instructed, saluted, and showed himself out the door. The first letter was folded in 4ths, while the other was folded in 3rds and sealed with a wax impression of Tessír's mark. The captain unfolded the first letter. Captain, here is Kosai's uniform, as well as the summons for the warrant request. I thank you again for meeting with me and the teachers of our school. Give Kosai my best, and I wish him a quick and full recovery. Tessír. That was fast, the captain said. Satisfied with Tessír's prompt efforts, the captain left his office and made his way to the medical wing to see his son.